Quad 66, the big test of little batteries. I thought this test was kind of interesting to do because of a couple of new cells. One of those cells is, and so these are all GNB cells, but one of the new cells is this new 600 milliamp high volt cell. So it's a lithium ion high volt. And what's interesting about it is not so much that it's 600 milliamps, but that it's a 90C discharge rating, which is higher than anything that they've offered in the past in 1S. You can compare this to their prior kind of like sort of best performance offering, which was the 520, and you can see there that that's an 80C cell. One of the cells I wasn't entirely expecting, but it kind of came on at the right time, is this new Lipo cell. And so this is a 500 milliamp Lipo, and again you can see that it's got the 90C rating, so it's a higher C rating, and you can see the minty blue Bob Ruge colors, and so he's kind of pushing for that. On all the cells I've gone to XT30, which pains me so much because XT30 is just, it's too heavy for this, but and it's not necessary to, like, I really don't think it gives, you know, from the testing from Mute FPV, he showed that it really doesn't give you that much more advantage over solid tooth PH2 and certainly not much over the BT2, but I'm just trying to simplify life here, and I needed to kind of do something to clean up my charging boards and things like that. So I just went across the board to the XT30 because in 2S the good cells are all XT30, and so I just went to that for simplicity. So then the other cells that are in here, I've got the 450. So I went ahead because I wanted some good basis for comparison. So this is a Lipo cell. It's their higher C rating with the 80C versus some of the other ones, but it's not quite as high as the new 90C. And then I've got an old battery. This one, it's old time-wise, but I've basically hardly used it because I just didn't like them. But this is a 600 milliamp battery, and you can see it's a 50C rated, and these were the ones that Ruge was kind of pushing for a while, or said, hey, they were great, and I didn't think they were great at all, and so I basically didn't fly them. So it's an older cell time-wise, but basically just as fresh as the other ones. So I've been generally flying mainly these down here, mostly in the Race Day Quads version, and they're excellent when they're brand new, but I do admit that they kind of fall off. And so although I'm going to show you some preliminary data here, part of what I'm interested in doing here is actually running these for a while, using them for a while, and then see what happens after they're a little bit beat up. Because just first, if I had to sort of rank these cells, just kind of best to worst, this is how I would put them. I'd basically kind of put them like this, where I do think these three are kind of similar, and then these two are sort of, when I'm flying them, I don't think they're as good, but it's hard, you know, when you're just kind of flying mixed flying, it's sort of like pretty subjective, and it's pretty hard to say, you know, whether one's better than the other. But I do feel like flying them, I think, other than time, because this one gives up a little quicker, I do think I'd honestly have a little bit of a hard time maybe distinguishing these three. But I do think I could reproducibly distinguish these two. I think I could reproducibly pick these out and say these are not as good. To me, the most interesting cell is this one. And unfortunately, so these sold out. The 1S sold out like instantly, and so I actually bought a 2S pack and split it. Unfortunately, when I was splitting it, I killed one of the cells because the tape in between was so tight that when I pulled it apart, it vented that one cell, and so I just destroyed it. I also bought two of these. Unfortunately, one of these has already died, but it kind of goes into the question of, like, okay, if, you know, one of the reasons to think about the Lipo cells is, do they hold up better than the lithium ion high volt? But the reason I say that this one's the most interesting is because this flies more like a high volt in some ways, where it kind of like, it feels pretty energetic and good, but when it's new, it does the same thing that these do, where like you fly, the voltage seems pretty good, and then it falls off a cliff very suddenly. And it kind of does that. These, interestingly enough, don't seem to fall off the cliff as bad. But again, that's kind of subjective. So what I did for this test is to try and be a little bit more objective about it. So I use this quad. The reason I use this one, this is the Ubidrone B-Brain brushless board. The reason I use this one is because it's got a built-in current meter, so I could at least kind of measure that and maybe give a little bit more objectivity. And the way I did this test is I literally just did straight up punches. So I just went full out punch, punch out, brought it back down, full out punch out, and I did that for 4 minutes. I paused in the middle at 2 minutes to kind of see what the voltage was at. And then at the end, I kind of looked at the summary of, you know, what's the end voltage, the resting voltage, lowest voltage, minimum, things like that. In terms of some other kind of data on these cells, one of the things to consider is weight. When we're thinking about all these, far and away the heaviest cell is this old, the older 600, and this one comes in at 15.5 grams. Then the next heaviest, I think, is actually this 500, and that comes in at 15.3. And I think part of that is just these wires. These are some definitely heavier gauge wires and a little bit on the longer side. You know, compare that. There's quite a bit more weight in the wire, which maybe that's a little convenient, but you can see with all these other cells that they're shorter wires and they do just fine. So anyway, so this one was, let's see, 15.3. So in order of weight, then the next heaviest is the 600 high volt, but it's quite a bit lighter. It's 14.6. So this was 15.3, 14.6, and obviously some of that's going to be coming from the difference in wire. But it's kind of interesting that you get 100, you know, you're getting 100 more mAh out of this, yet at a lighter weight. Some of that's going to be in the wire. This is actually very similar to the 600. This comes in at 14.3. So yeah, very similar. This, so 14.6 versus 14.3. So really between these two, hardly any weight penalty. Based on that alone, I would go with the 600, just because I like the shape of it better. It's a little shorter. I don't like these super long. They're kind of, I don't know, I think they're a little ungainly. Where the 600, you can see it's just a little bit shorter, and I think that gives a little bit better profile in the air. And then by far the lightest one is 450 Lipo, and this one is a good gram lighter. It's 13.5. Obviously really short wires too, but it is definitely going to be a little bit smaller of a cell in terms of being a gram lighter, but it's kind of like similar profile to the 600. I'm not sure where the weight difference specifically comes from. There, you know, it's maybe a little longer, I don't know, maybe a little thinner, something like that. But so anyways, that's kind of that part of it. So on to the results, and these are definitely preliminary results. I don't think these are all that important. I think these are going to be more important when we get the batteries kind of beat up a little bit. But anyways, it's kind of interesting. And in the link below, there's going to be a link to this spreadsheet. I just wrote it out here because I'm sick of staring at a computer and it's a nice day out, and so I just hand wrote this. Apologies for the messy handwriting. But so what I looked at is the mAh used according to that B-Brain brushless board, the max current that it drew, that 2-minute kind of hover voltage, the minimum voltage that I hit, and then the resting voltage. So the resting voltage was, okay, when I was still hovering, and then after it sat for a little bit, where did it recover to? So right before you disarm, and where to recover to. And so basically what we see is that with all of these, they're basically hitting kind of the same max amperage. but there's definitely some very big differences in the minimum voltage they hit, or the 2-minute voltage, the minimum voltage, and the resting. And what's kind of interesting about it too is that there's a little bit difference in MAH. Even though I tried to do the test pretty consistently, and I think the higher performing cells, I think I drew less current out of them, because when you punch them, the props give you a higher pitch scream, and it punches, to me anyways, it seems like it punches out further. I've also included a DVR below. It's in a Google Drive file, so you can look at that yourself. I didn't really go back and scrutinize in detail whether I did the test super consistently, but I tried to be consistent. But I think what was happening, the reason I have more MAH used is because it's a function of like trying to get the same sort of feel of the punch out. But if your voltage is higher, you're not going to need as much current, and if you're basically punching out faster, you're going to punch out for less duration of time. And so I think that's some of the differences we see, because kind of the weakest performing cell in some ways, the 600, in terms of how it feels, you know, actually produced the most MAH, but it doesn't feel that way. And I think that's kind of the explanation, is because when we're looking at MAH, how much work you do is actually a function of the voltage and the amps. But anyways, so what do I see from this? What I see from this is that both of these cells performed very similarly, the 520 and the 600, because you can see that the 2-minute voltage was pretty similar, 3.76. The minimum voltage they hit, this is probably where the 600 kind of shows the benefit. Its lowest was 3.37, and the 520 was 3.32. Again, these are both the high volts. And then if you look at the final and the recovery, at the end, the 600 is a little bit higher, kind of hover voltage at 3.6 versus 3.58, and then it recovers to 3.69 versus the 3.67. And so these voltages this recovery is after 4 minutes of just doing up and down punch outs. Of course, it's going to be super windy and make this video look terrible, but I don't really care at the moment. So how do these Rugi cells, you know, where do these fit in here? They kind of surprised me, and I actually ran them twice. I did 2 of these test runs on them, because so that's the Lipo here. Obviously it's the same cell, so it's got the same numbers there. And so the first time I did it, I got 540 mAh used versus 530. Max amps 30, max amps 28. And then they looked not bad at the 2-minute point, where they were 3.69. So obviously a little lower than the high volts, but you know, it's a Lipo and it's not that much lower. But then if you look at the minimum voltage, they sagged out on that punch out, 3.16 and 3.21 versus 3.32 and 3.37. So that Lipo, when you're doing that punch out, and maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm hitting it harder, but I don't think so, because look at my MAHUs. This is all pretty consistent here, pretty consistent there. And I'm getting it down to, you know, 3.2, 3.16. Maybe, I don't know, maybe I was hitting it a little bit harder and it's not fair. But at the end of the day, for similar MAH used, look where it finishes up. Not very good. Hovering in, it's just falling off the cliff, down 3.37, 3.37. And then, you know, resting at 3.45, 3.47. So it's giving up like, you know, 0.2 to those high volt cells. And that's notable when you're flying. And so I think early on in the cell, it feels pretty good, but towards the end, you can definitely, you know, it sort of sags out and it falls off a cliff, and it does it sooner, to where it really basically kind of almost didn't quite make it through this 4-minute test, where all the other cells made it through the 4-minute test. So I'm gonna let that paper go because it's a little too windy. But so when they're brand new, I feel like this is like kind of a repetitive issue when we're, I don't know, kind of listening to people about cells. But you know, this is kind of 2 times in a row now where Rugi's like, don't use this, use this. And this kind of just killed the performance of the quad, it kind of ruined it. And then we've got the same story again, where it's like, don't use this, use this. And at least when they're new, weight's better on this, the voltage is better, and performance is a little better. And so why are we going to use the Lipo? The one place where we might use it is if after we use these for quite a while, the Lipo hangs on longer than the high volt. And we'll see if that's true or not. It might be, but at some point too, if the high volt makes it long enough to where, we're just talking about little 1S cells here. They're not that expensive. They're what, like $5-6 or whatever they are. And if you refresh your cells like every 3 months or so, is that crazy of an expense for 1S? Like, I don't know. I'm thinking like with 1S, we're already kind of so starved for power that you might just have to step up and buy the more powerful cell, even if it doesn't last longer. But we don't even know if that's true yet. We're gonna find out though. I do want to get at least one more of these, because you never want to kind of make judgments on just an N of one, a sample of one. I'm not going to buy a whole bunch, but I'm going to try and buy at least 1 or 2 more. Unfortunately, that's going to throw off some of the mix, because basically what I'm going to do is take all the cells I have, and I have some more of these, but I'm going to kind of try and charge them all and fly them all the same number of times, so that when we go and retest them at the end, we can compare the results and see how they held up, and maybe the data gets a little bit leans more towards the Lipo versus the high volt. But brand new fresh cells, I think this is your winner, mainly because it's hardly any heavier than the 520, and I prefer a slightly shorter cell. You can see how it's not quite as long, and it does perform a little bit better. It definitely flies longer too. When you're just kind of free flying, you'll get an extra, I think, 20-30 seconds out of this versus the 520. So yeah, if you want to dig into data, check out the spreadsheet and the link. If you want to look at and critique my testing with my punch outs, go ahead, take a look through the videos as well. All right, till next time, cheers.